So I want to talk about some news that has come out of Honda. They've said that they're going to be canceling a few of their previously announced electric vehicles for the US. So these are their Zero line of cars, their Honda Zero SUV, Zero Saloon 2, as well as a new Acura RSX, which is not like the sports car of the past, but it's going to be a coupe SUV anyway. We're going to talk about why they have canceled these plans, what's happening in the wider industry that may be leading to automakers making this decision, and whether this is the right decision or not. They've cancelled these cars. They've also cancelled their joint venture with Sony. So their Afeela sedan and SUV. These were going to be higher end electric cars, which, to be honest, they didn't look super compelling. They had pretty boring conservative designs. They had a screen-based interior, which Sony were touting as being super advanced and leading with their expertise in the electronic space, but didn't really have a compelling USP compared to some of the other Chinese cars that were out there. That project probably was never going to be something that was going to take off. It would have only really been niche, and I'm sure it would have posted a lot of losses for them. But it's more interesting that they've really pivoted with their more mainstream cars, which was going to be the Zero line cars, as well as their Acura RSX. What's happened is that there's been a bunch of changes in the political environment in the US. They're going to be pulling back on a lot of the incentives that allow people to receive discounts from purchasing electric vehicles. There was also previously corporate average fuel economy penalties, which are now being scrapped too. So Honda feels less of a need to go down this EV route and focus more on the mainstream petrol cars, at least in the US, but this would have flow-on effects globally. So Honda are kind of in full panic mode. They're completely retreating from their previous plans. There has been some drop in sales in the US. Sales grew in the US for EVs by just 1% in 2025. In Canada, they fell by 41% after subsidies were removed. So there's obviously some sort of nervousness in the Honda management group, but in my view, it's probably quite a short-sighted decision. I think in the longer term, people are going to continue to buy EVs, and as incentives get scrapped, maybe there might be some short-term effects from people that may have previously only purchased an EV because of these incentives. But longer term, people are starting to get used to the idea of EVs, the driving experience, the lower cost of ownership in the long run, some more recent factors that are making it more and more challenging for people to own and operate a petrol car. For example, with the recent turmoil in the Middle East, we're seeing oil prices skyrocket. In Australia, we're seeing the price per litre go up to as much as nearly $3. People are struggling. People probably will continue to buy petrol cars, especially if the prices come down and it's more kind of reasonable to own one and drive one. But the cost of ownership of EVs are coming down, infrastructure is improving, and more manufacturers, for example, the German brands, BMW, Audi, Mercedes, they all have strong EV plans moving forward. Even Toyota recently going quite hard after being probably slower adopters and really focusing on hybrids and petrol cars for the best part of the last 10 to 15 years. In the recent times, they've released a brand new Toyota BZ. They've released a new Highlander, which is EV only as well. They've also announced a new CHR too. So all these new plans from manufacturers to go down the EV route, yet Honda are retreating as well. And in fact, Toyota in the first quarter of 2025, the new Toyota BZ actually outsold the Prius in the US. So it shows there is going to be some demand there. And the fact that Honda is pulling back on that development is just going to mean whenever they decide to come back in and pursue EVs again, they're probably going to be behind the curve. So we've seen this sort of pattern from Honda before. We've seen, for example, in Formula One, they were in there in the mid-2000s, had a reasonable amount of success. They were there in the 1980s as well. They had a huge amount of success with McLaren. And then they pulled out, come back in, pulled out again. They came back in with McLaren in the early 2010s. Didn't do too well. They went over to Red Bull, did amazingly, won a world championship with them. And then they pulled out again. And now they've got back in with Aston Martin. And they're really struggling because they've lost a lot of their personnel. So you can see that impact of having that really hasty short-term mindset on what that can actually do to a business and your competitiveness. So I think from Honda's perspective, they're not making the best move here. That doesn't mean they need to make their whole line of vehicles EV. Manufacturers are definitely pulling back in terms of going full on EV. For example, Porsche wanted to make pretty much their whole lineup, except for maybe the likes of the 911 electric. And even the new Boxster came and was going to be electric, but now those plans have been scrapped. So they're pulling back a little bit, but they're still continuing on with the Cayenne and the Macan, and they might introduce a few more petrol models, but they're still persisting with some EV options, which might appeal to the right people, but they're not fully changing tack, which Honda seem to be doing. I think it's probably dangerous times for Honda, for sure. We're also seeing the Chinese manufacturers are going from strength to strength, and EVs innovating every day. Soon they might be releasing solid state battery technology. So to keep up with the Chinese, you can't just have an all-in approach on combustion engine cars. They're clearly innovating in the electric space. People still want EVs. It's not for everyone, but for the right people, it still makes sense. And if China keep innovating, keep moving ahead, they are going to be making the cars that people want, not these legacy brands like Honda. What was recently announced, however, is that they said they're going to be spinning off their research and development arm into an independent kind of entity, sit away from the main business. They have recognized by spinning off their R&D arm that they really need that arm to focus and innovate again and compete with the Chinese. But on the other hand, the other side of the business is sort of confused and asking them to pull away from that EV space where most of the innovation is currently happening. There's definitely some mixed messages going on in Honda. They're a great brand that at their best they make quality mainstream vehicles, arguably the best mainstream vehicles. But I think the more they pivot, change, and be uncertain about the future, the more it's going to hurt them and the more they're going to fall behind the competition. Let me know what you think. Do you think Honda have made the right move by pulling out of the EV projects? Do you think that they're shooting themselves in the foot? Let me know in the comments below. And if you like this video, feel free to subscribe. See you in the next one.